band! You hear it?
It is necessary for the recording of sound to convert the sound waves to corresponding changes in light. The sound waves produced by my voice are transmitted through the air to the microphone, where these sound waves are converted to changes in an electric current. These variations in the electric current are then amplified and used to control the light. This varying beam of light falling on the photoelectric cell produces variations.
True crime. I know that I'm sure the listeners of this show know that I tend to look at it differently, normally from an occult angle. And this author that I have on today looks at true crime, or the cases that they have looked at, kind of in the same way. And actually, tell you the truth, probably a lot deeper and better at it when it comes to astrology. So this is a plus for me. And it's also a huge for me because they're also a fan and a listener. So I was like, wow, that's great. And somebody who wrote books. I always like trying to promote people that hit me up that write books, because I think that takes a lot of time and effort, and I think that's pretty impressive. Before I introduce the guest, I do have Lisa with me today, co-hosting. What is up, Lisa? How are you?
How's it going? Good, very good. Thank you for having me on.
Of course. No, I figured, listen, if we're talking about occultism and true crime, I mean, I got to bring you on. It's kind of like, you're like the co-host for that now. So, yeah,
I love it.
And here we got the guest, BD Salerno. Thank you very much for coming on. Real quick, just to let people know, she's got, from what I can see, she's got 4 books out: Numerology of the United States, Forensic by the Stars, Astrology Investigates, Exploring Forensic Astrology. And the topic that we're going to be talking about in this episode, Richard Speck and the 8 Nurses, Deconstructing a Mass Murder. BD, I'll just call you that for short for right now. Would you like to maybe give yourself a little bit of an introduction and plug whatever you'd like to plug?
Sure. Hi, Nick, and thanks for having me on.
Of course. No, thank you.
And I guess I could start by saying, in my 9-to-5 career, from which I'm now retired, I was a paralegal, but I always had, since childhood, a fascination for, I'd say, the occult, the paranormal, the unseen.
Yes, right.
And I was also fascinated by the stars. When I would go outside as a little kid, I would look up at the stars and just, it somehow felt like home to me. I can't explain that.
I used to do the same thing. I would sometimes,
really?
Yeah, like as crazy as it sounds, I'd be a little kid. I'd lay out in my back lawn and just lay on the lawn and stare up at the stars. And like, I would look up at the sky and I'd be like, there's something about that up there that is like a wonder we don't know about. And it just seems so like wild to me. Like,
exactly. That's my sentiments exactly. But I was very lucky because my father was a navigator in the Air Force during World War II, and they did all their flight missions at night over the Pacific. So he had to learn to navigate by the night sky. So he saw that I had this interest in the sky and the moon and all that. So he would take me out at night and say, okay, this is Sirius, this is Procyon, this is Capella. He taught me the night sky because that's how he had to navigate the Air Force missions during the war. So that really stuck with me. And as I got older, I started to learn astrology. And it made sense because astrology...
You grew up with it in a way.
Yes, you use the stars as a guide, in my view. They don't control us. They don't make us do horrible things. They are a guide. They synchronize. All the energies are synchronous. And we're just an expression of those. So I started to learn astrology, and about the age of 15... And I was also interested in a lot of I was interested in psychology mostly. And at 15, what happened was the murder of 8 student nurses in Chicago, for which Richard Speck has always been considered the killer. And something about that crime just rocked me. I was a sensitive girl. I was a sophomore in high school. And I thought, who the hell would kill 8 nurses? I was just sick over it for days. And it never kind of left me as I went on to learn about true crime, because by then I had a fascination for crime. I wanted to understand what was going on a emotional level, on a mental level. And so as I got into true crime, every time I heard about Richard Speck, I'd think, oh my God, that was so awful. All the feelings would come flooding back. And I thought, someday I really want to know what really happened, because the official narrative of that crime was bizarre. He supposedly overtook 9 healthy, strong young women without as much as a scream, without any resistance. They were just steps away from a door where they could escape. Nobody tried to escape. It was just a horror story in my mind, and it traumatized a lot of people. So the pandemic rolled around a few years ago. I'm looking for something to keep me busy indoors.
There you go.
And I was going to do, I skipped over where I got into crime astrology, but anyway, you've already kind of gone over that. I decided I wanted to look more into the mass murder of the nurses, because it had always bothered me. So I did a chart, because in crime astrology, or as we call it, forensic astrology, it's like a birth chart for a person. You take the time of an event and you cast a chart, and it will tell you things about that event. It will describe things.
You know what's wild? I never thought of actually taking events and putting them through I never thought of doing that, a birth chart.
No, well, it works really well. It works incredibly well, and there's some very gifted astrologers on YouTube who are doing that right now. And
now I'm wishing I did that with the Gilgo Beach. Like I was even telling you prior, looking at one of the chapters in your book, Pisces Rising, I was already seeing numbers that were associated with Gilgo Beach from you doing a birth chart, and I'm like, what?
Yeah, well, that's Pisces Rising is real interesting, and of course it was in my case as well. But so I do a chart, and it didn't seem right. I thought, this isn't certain. The planets describe the people and elements in the crime, and the planet that described the nurses didn't seem right. It was too well placed. I mean, the planets are very descriptive. They'll tell you. You'll see right away, well, it's the victim's planet is in a bad way. It's afflicted, or it's in a bad position astrologically. So it was, but at the time I had such tunnel vision. I just saw a certain thing, and that was fateful. That was meant to happen that way, because I stopped doing the chart. This is the wrong time. I got to find the right time. So I started to research all that I could find on the crime. And I would like to tell the listeners, if they want to read an absurd story, look up Richard Speck murders on Wikipedia. And if you don't think something's way off with that narrative, it's right there in the narrative how it was told. Anyway,
that's what people are going to be saying 5 years from now with the Brian Kohlberger case.
Oh, they will. Yeah, absolutely.
This makes no sense.
Will. Yeah. So I start researching. The more I research, I think this is a bunch of BS. This cannot have happened this way. So I went full court press. I got FOIA requests. I got the FBI files. I got the police files. I got the trial transcript. I got everything. I was fortunate in that not much has been written in the way of books. There were 2 mainstays of books on the crime. One was by the prosecutor, which was so riddled with inaccuracies that it used to make me angry when I read it. The other one was by Speck's psychiatrist, and that put a whole different look on him, but it was written with the intention, as you mentioned, of making a true crime bestseller, which it became. Yeah. So I thought, I got to tread carefully between these 2 extremes. The prosecutor's book was a self-congratulatory piece of work on what a great job they did, and how horrible, what a monster he was, and in the meantime, it spread more inaccuracies than I could verify. I mean, I could just debunk a lot of it. The psychiatrist's book was that poor Richard Speck is a victim of his circumstances, and he's as much a victim as the nurses, and I couldn't buy that either. But because I have issues with psychiatry. I don't even want to go there.
He's just as a victim, even though he's still alive and has a chance.
Right. So I really dug into this research, and I would sit for hours and just scream because I can't believe what I'm reading. Anyway, I as I said, I literally deconstructed everything about the crime, from the steps he took up the stairs and what happened next and what happened next. And it was totally from, like I said, physical evidence, critical thinking. That's all I had. I'm not an investigator. I'm not a cop. I'm not a lawyer. It was just using critical thinking, and I wanted to see how far it could go.
Well, not for
And
nothing. I mean, detectives should, I know as crazy as this may sound, they should be thinking that way and actually less emotions.
Yeah.
I hate to say it.
No,
Because
I
once you start
agree.
throwing emotions in there, you'll stop looking at other things.
Right, and so I just plotted ahead, thinking it's just common sense. It's what you need to see is going to become apparent to you, because as I put in a chapter of the book, all the crazy things that are happening to me on the side were sort of confirming that I was on the right track. It's hard to explain the synchronicity of things that were happening in my life. I did a whole piece on a song that was important in the narrative. Turns out the song was from the Broadway musical Carousel, which was the name of Jack Ruby's club in Dallas, but we don't even have to go there. The song was about, it connected to one of the last victim. No, she wasn't the last victim. One of the victims who entered the house and was killed, and there's some very strange stuff around just her death specifically. Anyway, the day that I researched that I found out was the same day that Jerry and the lead singer of Jerry and the Pacemakers were a 1960s British band. The lead singer died, and he had made that song famous. And I was like, oh my God, the guy died the same day that I was looking it up.
Yo, that's weird.
And other stuff
would
happen like that. I was checking out Richard Speck's relatives in Chicago. Their house number was 3966. And I got a phone call from a friend of mine that day, and she left a voicemail. And she said, oh, I have a new number. It's blah, 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 3966.
That stuff would weird me out.
Yeah.
As silly as it sounds, I would be like,
weirded
what?
you out. What do you think it did to me? Stuff like that just happened. I would think of something and open a book, and there was it in the exact words I was thinking. This to me confirmed that I was supposed to be doing what I was doing, and that I was on the right track.
Didn't the murders happen in 66?
Yes, July. Oh, here we go. If you want to dive into numerology, July 13th, 1966.
See, 13 again. We had 13s. Didn't we have 13s all over Gilgo?
Yeah.
We had 13s in Gilgo. The fascinating.
Superman's birthday is on the 13th.
I mean, I even think that sorry to interrupt you, BD,
Sorry.
I even think, even going into, I keep bringing it up, Brian Koberger, you have one guy and three girls. Even with Gilgo Beach, you have three girls with the first name starting with M, and then one that's different. There's like these 1 and 3s popping up. That's very weird in my opinion.
Well, that's crazy that you say that, because once I finished my research, I was noticing all these occult references, not just astrology. I hadn't even done the astrology by this time. The numbers were just piling up over and over again.
That's what I think is weird about true crime. If you start looking at statistics and numbers, some of the more major crimes, you will start seeing somehow the same numbers just popping up for different things. And it's almost like, this is weird. This is weird.
You do. And if you learn to look at it that way, then it starts to fall into what I call this matrix of evil, that everything bumps into each other at a certain point.
It's like you have to look at the article and the information and just scan it for the numbers and actually just don't even really look at it too much, just so you see numbers.
You don't have to.
And then you're like, oh, okay, I saw that over there for that reason. Very weird.
So with the July 13th, 713 adds up to 11. 7/13/1966 adds up to 33. Wow. And 11 and 33 define all the other numbers that come out of this, because the official narrative, which when I refer to it, it's not what I believe really happened, but it's what everybody else believes. It was given to believe to this day in all the true crime literature. In the official narrative, Richard Speck broke into the nurse's townhouse where 8 student nurses were living. It was like a dorm, but it was a townhouse. He broke in at 11 p.m.
11 p.m.
Okay.
Even the 8. I don't know.
Even the time time, 11 p.m., and it brackets the action because the next morning, now this is an organic number because I believe what he told his psychiatrist. He woke up at 11 a.m. the next morning.
Oh.
So 11's bracket, this whole thing.
Wow.
He had no memory of what he had done the night before. He had absolutely no memory of it. And the interesting thing was he never denied the murders. He just said, I don't remember. But if they say I did it, I guess I did it, because he had the mental age of a 12-year-old. He suffered from traumatic brain injury, and he often had lapses of memory, which he self-medicated with alcohol and drugs since he was about the age of 13. And a lot of it was drinking to drink, and a lot of it was drinking because he suffered from really bad headaches because he had numerous brain trauma, concussions, brain injuries, falling out of a tree, landing on his
That's
head
interesting.
and stuff like that.
You know, real quick, I hate
when he said he didn't remember, I believe that he didn't remember. Yeah.
Real quick, if you don't mind, again, I can't believe how it didn't click in my head until just now. With the number 8 in the nurses, 8, we're even seeing a lot of that right now, I think, too. And the thing is that what I try to point out to people, and I don't think maybe they get it or not, but Thoth, again, I'm going to bring it up, starts on the 8th sphere, in my opinion, and goes up the tree. And his last one kind of would be the 2nd sphere. And, it's just weird to me how, again, 8 and then the 11's very prevalent. You add 11, you get 2. I've just seen that with, even stuff going on, and I don't want to get into it with, Kelsey and Travis. Kelsey and Taylor Swift. The symbolism with Ukraine, right? Not Ukraine, with Israel. October 8th. And there's it's just that you start seeing the same numbers, 8, 6, 4, and 2. And in my opinion, on the Tree of Life on the Kabbalah, you were going from 8 to 6 to 4 to 2. If kind of like Tahuti's path, in my opinion. So it's you start off at 8. Gilgo Beach. Who was that chick? Gilbert. She started at House 8 on her little travels throughout Gilgo Beach. It's just very weird. This 8.
Yeah.
It's like the symbol of for the magician.
The 8 in astrology, the 8th house of a chart rules. Well, it doesn't rule. It concerns murder and death. Scorpio is the 8th sign. I'm not insulting Scorpios, believe me, but in the crime chart, things are black and white. In the natal chart, they are not.
See, I think... Sorry, go ahead.
Scorpio is an 8, which is, a secretive sign also. And Saturn, the planet Saturn, has 8 moons. And Saturn is considered the planet ruling death in many branches of astrology. So you have the 8 with all the astrology, and it matches in the numbers in the crimes.
See, I have even said I think in the tree, in a sense, you need both bottom spheres, 8 and 7, to in a way work with each other and rise up. In a sense, Saturn, you're saying, has whatever, he's with the number 8, but yet it also
has 8 moons,
but yet has 7 rings.
Right.
So there you go with the 8 and the 7, the prince and the princess at the bottom of the tree coming together on Saturn. And I do think going up the tree, that's when, this is just my opinion, crossing the abyss and death comes in. So I do see the whole thing with death and 8 having an association, because that's going to start your ascension into death, I think, and crossing the abyss.
Right.
One of the things that I thought was really interesting is how Richard Speck supposedly committed the murders on July 13th, and that is when Rex was indicted, is the 13th. And so the 13th keeps popping up all throughout Rex, not to, merge Rex into it all, but, and then with the charges, it was a total of 11 victims, and he was charged with 3 counts of murder and 3 counts of something. It was like a 3, and then the 11 victims.
Wow.
So it was interesting. If you read it within the actual news clip, you see those, like Nick was saying, you see those numbers just pop up repeatedly over and over and over without even reading the context of the actual article.
Right.
Very weird. Sorry.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. No problem. The thing about the 8 was also good moving up. When Speck had his trial, there were the trial, the presentation by the prosecution lasted 8 days. The trial concluded in the 8th week, that it was starting from when they started out, with the hearings and the stuff, all the way to the end to the sentencing, with 8 days and then 8 weeks. And then Speck is sentenced to die in the electric chair June 5, 67. And it was 88 days later, on September 1, 67, he was supposed to be executed 88 days later.
Way.
So,
Wow.
I know, but, it's funny
that
how
88,
these
you
guys
see
get
that a
off,
lot.
like, he got off the same way Manson did because the state of Illinois overturned the death penalty. So he ended up spending the next 25 years of his life in prison, where he had a ball because he got all kinds of drugs, all kinds of booze. He ran rampant. He was kind of a sex fiend, and he just had the time of his life in prison. He actually
Was he gay?
Well, by the time he was in prison, he was.
Yeah, I guess.
He had.
Oh no, I'm just saying if he
couple-
was gay, he was definitely having a great time in prison. I'm sure.
Yeah, well, he not only was gay.
It's like he's like, oh, this is punishment.
It was. I think that was his reward for being the scapegoat for the crime. I don't think he did this crime.
He's like, I'm getting high. He's like, I'm getting high and getting my dick sucked every day. This ain't-
Yeah, really. He was having the time of his life, and I think it was. I think somebody might have made a deal with him and said, listen, he was a perpetual loser. He was a career criminal. He got caught every time he did something, and the man was in and out of jail. He couldn't get out of.
Was
his
not a
own
good
way.
criminal.
No, he wasn't even a good criminal. So for him to have the security of 3 hots and a cot, sex all the time, he got all kinds of drugs, and some of the drugs he got were female hormones. He developed feminine breasts.
Mm-hmm.
He had, there was this garish video was made of him in 1988. A video.
Oh, come on. 88?
I can't make this stuff up.
Come on.
A video was made of him. He had long, stringy hair. He was the ugliest, whatever you could imagine. And he had huge breasts. And in the video, he actually performed oral sex on an inmate. And then they snorted cocaine. This was supposedly in Stateville Prison in Joliet, Illinois. However, if you look at the video, there's no cell in a prison that looks like this. I don't know where this was filmed. And it was notorious. I haven't seen the whole thing. I've seen only the part of it where they censored the sex stuff. But it was supposed to be, I consider it like a mockery of the whole system, of the whole trial, of his whole conviction. Because it was a mock interview where they asked him, did you enjoy killing them girls? And he said, I sure did. And it's really bizarre, ugly stuff. And a lot of people point to that and say, there, you see, he did do it. He finally admitted it. He did do it. He didn't give a damn by that time.
No.
Who thought what?
At that point, you'll just like, I'll just say what people want to hear for attention.
He just said yes. And I think when you go to prison and you have the street cred of having killed 8 women, people aren't going to mess with you. People are going to respect you. And that was something that he always craved. He used to run with gangs of boys, and he did all these stupid things to impress them. And that's how he started getting involved in crime. He craved male approval because his stepfather was very abusive and very critical of him. And that was when he began to act out. His birth father was a very kind, loving man, but he died when Richard was only 6. And that, I don't think he ever got over that. So he would do all these things. He would tell people crazy stories of that he was a runner for a Mexican cartel, or he had gone to Vietnam and killed 10 guys with his bare hands. He made up crazy stories. So why would he not also brag about killing the nurses? I mean, there's no difference to him.
Again, I hate to interrupt you, but
no problem.
It's just like, bring up things and it makes me think about other stuff.
Right.
I mean, this is almost like as silly to me as Gacy's first stint in jail. Like, I got something built while I was here and I only did like 18 months and left. It's just like, what was the point of that? Like, that was almost like a joke. The guy goes into prison. He's part of like some fellowship in there, which I don't even know how the fuck that's possible. and, the junior whatever things that they had in there. And I think he got didn't he get a golf course or something built at the prison that he was in and then just left? It's like, come on, that was like, what just happened?
Yeah, there's such shady stuff, and
if he didn't get out early, he never would have done his other crimes.
Right, I know. Well, that's the same thing with Speck. Was that, and this is something I wish I could find out, but I couldn't get into this level of research. Well, Speck was in a federal prison he was sentenced to 3 years for forging a check. And he went to Huntsville in Texas, and he only served about a year and a half, and they let him out, and he violated parole, and he got off with, he was very similar to Charles Manson. If you've read Tom O'Neill's book, Chaos, Charles Manson broke parole constantly, and there were no consequences. They just kept letting him go. Well, the same with Speck. He had broken parole, and then he committed another crime, and then he'd be put into a local jail and be let out again and violate that parole. It just was crazy. Then finally...
You know what, just real interesting, I don't know if you know this, but when it comes to federal time, I don't know if this was a law that was different in the past, but you got to do 80... Doesn't matter. Federals, the whole country, you got to do 85% of your time. You only get 15% good time.
Right.
And like, I don't know if they have programs for serial killers or people who forge checks or whatever. If it's programs to knock off time, I really don't think they have shit for forging checks. But I mean, you have to do something to get extra time. They just don't like, oh, you were good and you'll get a 30 time off. No, you only get 15% in the feds. So you have to. There's something to get out that early. Something had to have been done to change it.
Well, here's what I think might have been done. I can't prove this.
Or I'm saying it's fishy. Something is fishy.
It definitely was. And especially in the context of Manson, people have all kinds of speculated that he was MK Ultra and all that, which is, I think, very possible. Getting back to Speck, when he was in Huntsville for, I don't think it was more than a year, he had gotten this tattoo, which is now very famous. It made him... It's the name of a book, Born to Raise Hell. He had that tattoo on his left arm. And while he was in prison, he was actually embarrassed about it because he got it when he was drunk and he felt stupid afterwards that he had gotten it. So while he was in Huntsville, he tried to burn the tattoo off his arm with a cigarette. And for some reason, the warden or the prison guards threw him into solitary for 30 days. And I thought, what's so bad about that? The guy, obviously he's self-harming, but not severely. But he was put into solitary for 30 days. And after that, he was let go. And I really question what went on. I mean, who had access to him? What went on there? It's all speculation on my part. I have no idea.
That's very
but
weird.
I
Does
wonder
it mention if he was
if these people are pre-selected, like in Dave McGowan Program to Kill, that book that I firmly believe in. If he was pre-selected to either take the fall as being a murderer, or somehow he was chosen because of his record. I mean, and I think the same might have happened to Manson. I don't know.
Do you know when? Do you know if Speck had when they put him into solitary? Was it real? Do you know if for a fact it was really solitary, or did he have one other person in his room? Did you ever notice anything like that?
No, I couldn't get access to any records going back.
Because that's just like another thing that I didn't know either. Depending on where you are, but like in the feds, like if they put you in the SHU, which could be for like your own protection, or it could be because you're a problem. It's like basically prison for prison, and for some ways. That's why I was in there. I was like, fuck. I was like, I'm already in prison and I fucked up in here and I'm in another prison. When you really start to think about it, you're like, God damn, like, I really can't get my shit together. But you're going to have somebody in there with you. Most people think it's really solitary and you're by yourself, but I mean, unless there's a serious situation, you are actually in there with somebody else. But he could have been by himself, but I just wonder, was there a roommate?
I don't know, but I'm for sure that there was a guard there.
Oh yeah, they'll have guards.
Had an undue amount. And the thing about Richard Speck was everybody thinking he's this heartless monster. He was actually very easily influenced by his peers, by men, especially men in authority. He actually seemed to have respect for them, because every time he was busted for something, he would identify himself and he would admit what he did. He'd say, "Yeah, I did that," and he did never really seemed to lie to the police. When a particular incident happened in Chicago, the official narrative claimed that he registered in this hotel under an assumed name. But when the cops came to his room, because supposedly he had a prostitute in his room and she saw that he had a gun, and they called the cops on him, which I'm thinking, what prostitute in 1960 Chicago would rat out a John for carrying a gun? That to me was a little weird. But anyway, I'm digressing. When the police showed up, he said, "My name is Richard Speck and I'm staying in this hotel for a week." It's like saying,
rat himself out.
he was an open book with male authority figures, and he became especially attached to his psychiatrist. He had a personal psychiatrist that spent months with him, and that was the guy that wrote the book Born to Raise Hell, Marvin Zaporin. And it told a whole side of him that you would never see in true crime history, that he actually was a broken person. I'm not saying he wasn't a messed up guy. I mean, he used to break into houses, he used to steal stuff. But he actually was not, I don't believe, I can't diagnose him, but I don't believe he was a sociopath. He did have feelings for people. He did have empathy for people. And when they showed him the nurse's photographs, he just said, "I just don't remember. I don't think I ever saw these girls." And he cried over it because he said, "These girls are so pretty. How could I do this?" So that whole thing about him was kind of heartbreaking, because it just seemed that everything built around it was a facade of lies.
Right.
And even when he was in prison, there was this horrible fire in Chicago. It was the winter time, and a little girl was burned severely. And he used to watch TV. They would have TV on in the warden's office, and he could hear it from his jail cell. And the girl desperately needed donations of blood and skin and all. She was very badly injured. And he wanted to donate his blood and skin to this little girl. And the psychiatrist said, "No, we better not do that because they're going to think you're trying to get sympathy. They're going to think this is a ploy." And he said, "Well, don't tell them it was me. I want to do it." And he told the warden, "I want to help this girl." And nothing came of it. So that to me is like, it doesn't sound like somebody with no feelings. And I don't think he was being manipulative. I don't know, but it just, all the monstrous stuff I don't believe is true. It was an invention, much like the whole official narrative of how the crime took place was constructed. And so those were the aspects that I focused on in the occult aspects, because going back to numbers, we had the 8 victims, but it was really supposed to be 7. And one girl who was best friends, Marianne Jordan, was best friends with one of the victims, Suzanne Farris. And Suzanne was going to marry Marianne's brother later that year. So they were spending the night together to talk about the wedding. And that is heartbreaking because she wasn't supposed to be there and she was murdered. So there were actually 8 victims plus one survivor. One of the nurses hid under a bunk bed, supposedly, and heard or didn't hear screams. She didn't hear screams, but she knew everything that took place. She was the only one who could tell the whole narrative of the course of the murders from start to finish, from when he broke in and all that. And that was very suspicious to me because I saw some of the crime scene photos, and bunk beds are pretty high off the floor. They're not like a bed where you could just barely shove it. You could shove a shoebox under it, and that's all the space you have. That they look to be at least a foot, if not more than 12 inches off the floor. And I was like, she was a petite young girl. She was Filipino. 3 of the girls were from the Philippines on a nurse program between the U.S. and the Philippines. And the Philippines is a whole other part of the story that I don't know that we'll go to that one. But anyway, they were there, and she survived by hiding under a bed. And her account of the crime, here's where we get back to occult. She, even though it was so traumatic, what was going on was traumatic, regardless of whether it was, the way it was told or not. It was horrible that 8 women were singly murdered in that house on that night. But she had this particular attention to detail. He took so and so out of the room. He was with her for 25 minutes. Then he came back and he took so and so, and he was with her for 40 minutes. Well, you cannot spend that much time. The girls, I'm sorry to be graphic here for the listeners, but the nurses were stabbed or strangled or a combination of both. And they also threw in sexual assault on top of it, which was not true based on the autopsy reports that I read. But anyway, that was thrown into the mix, and that's always been a part of the official story. So there's this whole sense, I always thought back to these bad zombie movies from the 1950s, where you have this young maiden in a trance is being led to some ritual altar or being led to some sacrifice. And that was the image I believe was supposed to be conveyed. Not that they were zombies, but there was this whole story about the nurses were trained to be passive, so that's why nobody fought back, which is absurd because they weren't dealing with a crazy patient in an emergency room. They were dealing with somebody who was systematically murdering them. And don't tell me you're going to stay passive at the point of a knife or a gun.
No.
So that, and getting back to her, she described everything in incredible detail. People.
Yeah, do you ever
hailed her as
question that, the too much detail?
Yes, because here's the thing. She timed everything. But
Yeah, when you said that, I was just like...
she timed everything, and here we go with time.
Sometimes,
Saturn
yeah.
was
Sometimes I
timed.
wonder, like, are these details being given
Yeah,
and showing the
it's a
numbers for specific reasons to tell us the real story?
It's a breadcrumb. It's a breadcrumb. I said in my book there was enough breadcrumbs to stuff a turkey, and that's exactly how it was. They, not to laugh at it, but
that's
No, but that's a good analogy.
she had, everybody was tied up. Once Speck broke in and he herded them all into the larger of 3 bedrooms, and he put his gun aside and took a bed sheet and cut these long strips of cloth, enough to tie up 8 women at the arms and the feet. He tied all of their hands behind their backs, and he tied their feet together at the ankles. Now, she went on to say for the next 4 hours, he spent 45 minutes with one of the women, and then he spent 30 minutes with another woman. Then he washed his knife off in the sink, running water, and then he came back in the room and took somebody else out, and she was gone. Her hands were tied behind her back. She had a wristwatch on, but her hands were tied behind her back. So how do you know what was 40 minutes and what was 25 minutes?
That's
Wow.
What was 30 minutes? And if that is in fact happening in front of you after you have been robbed at gunpoint, how the hell are you paying attention to how long everything took? It was a memorized script.
I
And
mean,
she-
this is,
sounds
again, I hate to bring it back up, but this is almost like it's giving me Idaho 4 vibes.
Yeah.
This whole time in between this stuff happening and the authorities being called, it's just like,
Yes.
come on.
Yes. There's something. Well, I know you must know this by now with the Idaho, the 1122 Kings
Yeah,
Road.
yeah, I was going to bring that up before when you said
that
11 and
is
33.
that is kind of right there. I thought, oh my God.
And Brian
here
lived
we
in
go
G
again.
building.
Yes.
And,
oh, wow.
and Kabar, which is the knife sheath, equals
Oh,
33 in simple
Jeez.
gematria.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, I got stuck on the 1122.
And Kings
You
and
don't have
Kings
to
and
tell me anymore.
Kings and Queens Road basically like connect
Yes,
too, I
Kings and
think.
Queens Road,
It's like,
I
come
know,
on.
Yeah, and, it was.
Got the
and
Yad
it was
Hey Vade
November.
formula.
It was November 13th, 2022. 11/13.
Yeah,
That's when it happened.
that's wild.
So
All right,
you
sorry
got
to get back.
you hear the numbers flying fast and furious. But so anyway, the whole thing, getting back to time, is a function is ruled by Saturn, and in the crime chart, Saturn was rising in Pisces in the crime chart, and Saturn, of course, in mythology is Kronos, who ate his children, and that's why Saturn represents death. So, and then you get the word chronology from Kronos, which also associates with time. So all that is connected to, she's telling time, and what it did was it had this hypnotic effect on the jury and the trial participants, But she sat on the stand, and then after 20 minutes, he took Marianne out, and then he came back, and after he spent 35 minutes, I was like, are you for real? This is murder in progress. and you
she's
remember
clocking
what?
it.
I know. She's clocking it. It's
She
bizarre.
was like reporting it already.
That's just
Yeah, so, but everybody, she was hailed as a heroine. She's so brave and all of this stuff. And I don't know.
If they would have had cell phones back then, instead of calling 911, she would have filmed the whole thing.
Well, sure. and then she could have never gotten away with all the lies.
She's like, I got to go live with this on Instagram first.
Well, that's the thing. If this thing happened now, it would have never happened the way it did. They would have had DNA galore, and they would have had cell phones.
and cell phone tracking. Yeah.
Cell phone tracking. So the whole thing, but the ritual stuff. When Richard Speck supposedly went to the nurse's townhouse to rob and kill them, here's another good one. He was staying on the southeast side of Chicago, and he was about a mile and a half from the townhouse. It was a straight walk across East 100th Street from where he was staying. Now, he had to cross the Calumet River. The river was about a mile from the townhouse. He had to walk over the Calumet River, which is a long walkway. It's not a little footbridge. He had to walk across it to commit the murders. Why you want to walk a mile and a half at night when you've been drinking all day long and taking drugs is, I don't know. Maybe some people can do it.
Or it could feel like a tournament.
He had to cross it. So the Calumet River, the Calumet is a very popular name in Chicago. There's Calumet Harbor, Calumet River, a lot of things named after Calumet. It comes from a French word that refers to a pipe made of reeds that is smoked in ritual ceremony. So you cannot escape the ritual, because here is a guy crossing a river, and during the murders, he goes to the sink and washes off his hands and knife every time. So you have the water element. Mm. And when he goes to the house, all the nurses lived on, they had a townhouse. It was a very small, I don't know how 8 nurses managed back then with one bathroom, but somehow they did. There were 3 bedrooms on the 2nd floor, and that's where they all were, because it was supposedly 11 o'clock at night. He breaks into the back door, goes right through the 1st floor, and goes up the stairs. I don't know. He'd never been in that house. I don't know how he knew where anything was. He went up the stairs. He had to pass 2 bedrooms. In one bedroom, there were 3 women at the time. In another bedroom, there's 1 woman. I believe the doors were open. Everything indicates that they were. So if he's there to rob them, they're right there. As he gets to the head of the stairs, the 1st bedroom is right at the head of the stairs with pocketbooks and wallets. And the nurses' rooms were a mess because understandably 8 women living together in a very small townhouse. They had no place to put their stuff. It was all over the place. He went past them. He goes past the 2nd bedroom, and he goes to the bedroom of the surviving witness, Corazon Amaral. Her door is locked.
What's her name?
Corazon Amaral.
Corazon. That sounds very much like. Okay.
Yeah. Corazon is heart in Spanish.
That's right. And Amaral, I didn't find any reference, but he goes to her room. Now, she locked her bedroom door at night. She had a roommate. There were 2 of them were both in the room. They were in bed. Why on earth does somebody who has broken into a house to rob, to steal, walks past 2 rooms full of stuff and goes to a room with the door closed, which is locked, and he knocks 4 times? Knocking on the door is a part of the Masonic initiation, except that they knock 3 times, but he knocked 4 times, whatever. But the fact that it just makes no sense. Why are you knocking on a door when there are people in a room and you have a gun and their purses are right there in plain sight? He goes and he knocks on the door that's locked. That to me, I was like, wait a minute. From that point on, it was all downhill for that narrative. And then he rounds them up. He at gunpoint. The 2 girls come out of the locked room. He rounds them up and he makes them all go into the larger bedroom and sit in a circle. Now, I don't know what ritual is done when you're not sitting in a circle. He makes them sit in a circle, And then he then takes a few dollars from this one and that one, and he says, I just need money to go to New Orleans. Right. And so he gets the money, and then somehow at some point he decides he's going to tie them all up, which he does, and then except that when he has to walk them back to each individual room, he has to then remove the ankle ties. So the whole thing is getting very inconvenient. But when he brings the first woman out, Pamela Wilkening, she was only 20 years old, he brought her to Corazon's bedroom.
How do you say? I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but
No,
how
no
do you
problem.
spell that name? Her name.
Corazon.
Corazon.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
Corazon. Because there
I'll
is.
put it in the chat.
Have you ever looked into that demon? They're very close with the same name.
No, I haven't.
Yeah, there's Choronzon. Corazon.
Oh, okay.
And that
It
is,
sounds close.
That goes back to Edward Kelly and John Dee and Enochian Magic and Crowley, kind of like expounded upon that. But there's other ways of spelling it, kind of, and that's very close. I think that's just interesting, not to me.
And the H is silent in Spanish, so even if you put it in with corazon, you wouldn't pronounce it.
Yeah, like it's even been called Coronzom. I mean, there's
That's real close.
Yes, that's what I'm
Yeah.
getting at. That was
And sometimes-
Enochian Dictionary. They call it that.
Right. Yeah. So that is interesting about her.
Sorry,
her
I
name.
just found that really weird. As soon as you said the name, I was like,
Yeah.
"Yo, that's real close to."
It is.
I was like, I gotta look this up real quick.
Can I?
Yeah.
I want to interrupt real quick because we're talking about the corazon. I don't want to forget. I watched a couple of things because I knew we were gonna meet with you, and the whole they referenced that he had like a virgin prostitute complex, and the whole nurses being in white, and then when they mentioned corazon and that he stabbed her, and not her, but he stabbed one of them in the heart, or he was
Right.
stabbing them in the heart. It was almost to me like sacrificial, like he was offering, or the scene was that you would offer a virgin, but you would never offer a prostitute. But he was, engaging in prostitution. I mean, not himself, but, a customer of it. And it just seemed like that dichotomy that they presented out in the news, it just kept being reinforced over and over. But anyway, that
is very, in my opinion, I said this when I covered Halloween. I think Michael Myers is almost like a version of Janus. And even with Janus, you can use like a cross, which would look almost like a knife, or just a straight line can be a symbol for him. And I do even, again, going back to Richard Speck in the 11 o'clock, that's very Janus-like to me. And the fact of like stabbing females in the heart, to me, is very symbolic, almost of Janus slaying the feminine energies, basically, of each seal or each sphere.
The first nurse who took out Pamela Wilkening was stabbed in the heart. Nobody else was stabbed in the heart.
Oh, okay.
Somebody, the next girl, I call them the girls because I felt so close to them. They were only a few years older than me when this happened, and I called them the girls. But anyway, the next nurse, he stabbed in the left eye.
Oh.
And then the next nurse, I'm sorry to the listeners to be so graphic, but her throat was slashed wide open to expose the voice box, and to me that was saying
silence.
What you saw something, don't talk. I just got almost a mafia impression from that, because the whole
that's
reason
totally
behind
occult to me. That's like silence, and even when getting
yes,
into eyesight.
they were all killed slightly differently, which also spoke to multiple killers. And the knife wound to the heart, I don't think Richard Speck would have managed something like that. He didn't even have a knife long enough to have made that wound, which was 4.5 inches long.
Oh,
The knife they attributed to him using, which was never submitted into evidence because they fished it out of the Calumet River and they couldn't prove it was his, it was 2 3/4 inches long. And the thing about the knife, that was another one of my double takes on my life at the time, was I had a penknife since I was a kid. I have this little penknife, I used to do a lot of woodwork and whittling and stuff like that. And it happened to be the same exact knife as what they fished out of the Calumet River, because they said when he went back home, he threw the knife in the river. Oh, they don't know, had no way of knowing that, but that's what they said. So they actually fished a knife out of the river, or so they said, with a magnet. And I saw the picture. Wait a minute, that looks just like my knife. So I looked at my knife. It was just almost exactly the same dimensions and the size of the blade. On my knife, it said Camillus, and I flipped because July 14th, when the murders continued overnight from the 13th into the 14th, July 14th is the anniversary of the death of Saint Camillus de Lellis, who was the patron saint of nurses and hospitals.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, come on.
Oh my
Come
gosh.
on.
Wow.
I can't make that up, guys.
Oh, that gave me chills.
I know. When I saw that on my knife, I had already been doing about this is already two and a half years into the research, and I had looked at my knife, but I never really looked at the little tiny brand name inscription on the inside of the handle. I saw that. I said, "Oh, isn't that just the way this is going?" Camillus, Saint Camillus. They were killed on the eve of the anniversary of the death of the patron saint of nurses and hospitals, and when they were buried on July 18th. Was the anniversary, the feast day, because saints have a death day and then they have a feast day. And if I need to do more research into saints, because saint stuff in this story is very interesting and very unusual. So Saint Camillus, patron saint, and they're killed on that anniversary. Saints also factor into other parts of the story in really bizarre ways that do relate to cult murder. But where was I going with this? Oh, back to the victim. The first victim, Pamela Wilkening, was killed in the northeast corner of the townhouse, which was Corazon's bedroom. In masonry, when they build a building, they commemorate the northeast corner. And I don't know whether that was deliberate or just, I don't know. But the first 3 victims were killed in the northeast corner of the townhouse. And they were laid out 3 side by side, 2 face up and 1 face down in the middle. And if you think of the 2 of these women were not tied up, yet they had no defensive wounds on their arms. Either that or the medical examiner just didn't note it. The autopsies to me seemed very incomplete. I'm not a pathologist. I don't study autopsies. But I have a background in medical stuff because I was a trained acupuncturist. I studied anatomy and physiology for a while and did that. In addition to being a paralegal, I was working in alternative health. So I knew the terminology in the autopsy report. That doesn't qualify me to interpret it, but I did not see mention of defensive wounds. So
well, if you look at enough of them, you probably get an idea of what a standard wound should look like anyways.
Right.
Yeah.
I would think defensive wounds would be mentioned, right?
Yeah, there was stuff that wasn't mentioned. They did not even have diagrams of the wounds, which I thought was very peculiar. For a murder of various wounds and nature of wounds, there's no diagrams of these wounds.
Now, another question to put you on the spot, and maybe you mentioned it before. Was there like multiple entrances and exits out of this house?
There was a front door, which was not used. It was always locked. And there was a back door. The mode of entry was another whole issue that I came across, that one of the things I sat at my desk and screamed because it was just so outlandish. He supposedly broke in through the back door by what he used to do when he did commit a burglary was jimmy a screen off of a window and reach in and open a door or go through the window. So on the day that all the police and reporters showed up and took photographs, there's a screen underneath the back kitchen window, which was right next to the door where he broke in or was let in or whatever. But what happened was, during my research, I'm reading what the prosecutor's own words. I don't think he realized what a gaffe he made. He said there was a lot of commotion when reporters reached the scene. One reporter even popped the screen off the rear window to take a look inside. And I thought, wait a minute, that's what Richard Speck supposedly did. So, in other words, he never broke in. It wasn't even him. The killers were let in, or they walked right in an unlocked door.
See, the reason why I'm asking is because, like, even again, I hate to keep going back to it. I'm almost wondering, is it almost like a copycat story here with Brian Koberger and the Idaho 4? It's like there was a lot of people that had multiple ways of getting out of that house, and just within the time that supposedly everything was done, I just find it hard to believe that, like, you're saying these girls didn't have defensive wounds. He was able to kill that many. Like, were they the first ones? Because if they weren't, how did they not, like, you know what I'm just saying? There's a lot going on, and, like, nobody running out of it, multiple ways of getting out of the place, nobody getting stopped, only one person with defensive wounds, I think, with the Idaho 4. It's just, like, really weird. It's like, how did this all happen this way? It just sounds fishy to me.
It's very fishy, because getting back to Corazon's detailed account of that night, there were 5 of them home and 3 of them were out. So when she was the last one to go up to bed and 3 of them were still out. So she checked the front door and saw that to make sure it was locked, but she didn't check the back door. So I don't know what state it was in, but the first one who came back, Gloria Davy, came home. I think the killer's already in the house. I'm not sure, but she came home around 11:40. And her boyfriend had dropped her off, and there's a parking lot behind the townhouse, and he dropped her off, and he said she didn't need to open the door with her key. The door was unlocked. So I believe it was just left that way, either intentionally or unintentionally. It was open, so there's no break-in. He came in through the back, and I believe they left out the back, because the next morning when Corazon pretty much jumped out a window onto the ledge of the house and screamed out to the street below in the front of the house, there's this massive distraction, leaving the back of the house quiet where the door was unlocked. And but there's only one door that I think was really part of this.
Too much of this really does sound like the Idaho 4 shit.
And then
this is really weird.
The thing about Idaho that also freaked me out in comparison was to come in and do all this damage and put the dog aside and
yes, there was a dog. Yeah, the dog.
There was a dog. He put the dog aside, and I was glad he did that. At least he left the poor dog alone. But the fact that how can one man overpower these young, strong, healthy people? In this case, the Speck case, there's 8 women. There's 9, but 8 got killed. Here's 4. And he comes in with a knife and does horrific damage. I think those stabbings were even worse than what was done to the nurses. It was nonetheless still very bloody and gruesome. But I thought of that right away. I thought, wait a minute, this sounds like Speck, because how did this guy get in and inflict all of this? Of course, and then leaving 2 witnesses, Speck left, or the killers left 1 witness. And I thought, I did think of that.
Another weird thing, even kind of somewhat of a connection to this, that it's just like me hearing like almost the same story. It might be a little bit different, but like with the Idaho 4 in this case, you both had an eyewitness that, like, basically the girl in Idaho 4 said, I think she opened up the door and like even watched a person go by. Not a problem, nothing.
Right.
And this girl was able to, like, I don't know. And then the girl who even saw the person doesn't still call the cops for hours and hours and hours and later. It's just very weird. Like, they even came in both stories, there was somebody who both witnessed the person there, but yet this story's fishy as shit. I don't know.
I did see the correlations, because leaving a witness whose behavior is then suspicious and inflicting all that damage in such a little. Although in the Speck case, he was supposedly there. Oh, you're going to love this. He was there from 11 p.m. until 3:30 a.m. You get your 11 and your 33.
Wow.
Even though the timeline, I took the timeline of everything Corazon said, and I said, I have to map this out. She said, this took 20 minutes, this took 40 minutes, blah, 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 blah. He could not have left at 3:30. It would have placed him after 4 o'clock in the morning. Now, why somebody wants to do this kind of mayhem and not get the hell out of there as fast as possible is beyond me. But supposedly he spent all this time in the house from 11 till 3:30, and even then she didn't call for help until almost 6.
Yeah, what's up with this? You know, and I don't know if you're rounding about or whatever, but if there is actually 2 4s and 6s in her story, in my opinion, she's just telling you exactly what I said before, with the launch from 8 going up the tree.
Yes. Yeah, I don't have a problem with that at all. I think that she was,
which is going to result in death.
Yes, and it did in a horrible way. But she then it was just bizarre how she claimed to remember stuff, and on the other end of that spectrum, Richard Speck remembered nothing. Corazon remembered everything. She described what he said to the girl. She described where each person sat. She described when he stood up. She described when he took the bindings off of someone's ankles and walked them out of the room. Everything, but she couldn't describe his face the next day. That was another whole issue.
She didn't say he had bushy eyebrows or anything?
He didn't even have a mask on. I mean, he was never there, but she just, the first identity sketch was hilarious. It looked nothing like him. And yet she didn't even give the sketch didn't go out until not the day that the crime was discovered, but the next day, the 15th.
I have often wondered if sometimes people, again, not trying to get too conspiratorial with it, but I think there was stuff possibly with the Zodiac Killer and another crime. I might be covering it soon if I'm not confused with it with a different case, but another one where there was somebody who kind of was left behind and lived and gave a description, and the first description they had did not even come close to matching the person that they ended up getting at the end. And sometimes it's how do you know, this is just, I guess, how a magician or a mastermind of just mind fuckery, you're actually going to totally fake that whole thing. Somehow that person's going to be connected to you, but not really through paper or through phone, maybe somebody that through somebody else that's, kind of part of your club. And they're going to say, yes, I lived this, and this was their description. All they have to do is lie and say I didn't die. And give a total fake fucking story.
Yep.
I mean, it's really, if you think about it, that's really not that far off to do, and I don't know why. I'm sure I'm not the only person who might have thought that idea. You know what I'm saying?
No. The thing about the
I do wonder how much shit, how staged or how far will some people go. And I'm not even saying that the news is lying. It's that, maybe the news and even law enforcement's getting duped. You know what I'm saying?
Yes. I think, though, that eyewitness identification is not, back in the 60s, it was the word of gospel.
That's why I'm bringing this up. Yes.
It's not, they have proven that it can be very questionable. And there's also the fact that Corazon was Filipino. She had only been in this country for about 10 weeks. And she was not, there are issues with interracial identification. Sometimes you just aren't used to seeing. She hadn't been around a lot of Caucasians, and she did not describe him well, even though she described every other single thing down to the minute practically. And so the identity sketch was a wash. But there were other things that could have identified him that were completely ignored and actually were lied about, because one of the Filipino nurses, Valentina Pasion, she was found with short black hair. She had clutched between her fingers and flesh under her fingernails. She had scratched the killer and pulled his hair out. Now, the reason I can say with authority that the whole narrative is a lie is because Corazon testified at trial. When Valentina was removed from the room, her arms were tied behind her back. She testified to this. How do you pull hair out of somebody's head and scratch them with your hands tied behind your back?
That's interesting.
And so they took into evidence a short black hair, and it was never heard of again. Didn't make it to trial, didn't make it to the evidence exhibit. The short black hair just disappeared.
Well, it's like the 3 other DNAs that were gathered
Yeah, and so one of the killers had short black hair, and I theorized that there was a paramilitary person with a crew cut and short black hair.
You know, it's so funny if you start thinking about the whole theory that Kopecker and Koberger are connected. This is exactly how this would fit in.
Because you're thinking of Brent Kopecker, right?
Yeah. He was a power trooper, wasn't he?
You get paramilitary in there.
He was a fuck.
It's crazy stuff, I'm telling you.
Yo, even on some of his stuff, when he shows machetes on his Facebook, the brand that is equals 33 as well. I don't know how I came up looking that up, but I forgot the name on it. But yeah, there was somebody who I think was like trying to show a possible connection, and they were showing his like machete, and the brand name equals in simple English 33 as well as the knife sheath from.
Oh, wow.
It's just weird shit. I'm not saying that definitely is. I know that's kind of a little bit out there. But it's just funny how, like I'm saying, like, even with conspiracy theory or, like, what's being told in the news, this case just seems like it's just constant connections to Idaho 4. It's really weird.
It does. And it reinforces my own personal belief that when you start ripping out these roots, they're all connecting at some point. And I'm not saying that specific people, but the patterns. You know, the patterns and the numbers.
Sometimes I even say, is this just like a code that's seen with this type of stuff going on?
Yeah, I'm more of a believer in that every day, just from what I find. And like I said, I have not really looked into. I've listened to a lot of all the speakers you've had on about Idaho, J.J. Vance.
Oh yeah,
and Wicked Plan. I've listened to them with rapt attention because it's so interesting. And the other stuff presented, and even going back, I tend to go back to archival crimes because nowadays people are getting hip to some of this stuff. But back then, when you had the assassination of JFK and RFK and you had the Speck murders, people were clueless. People believed everything they were told. And I was just grateful to have a father who, when JFK was assassinated, he sat down and he said, "This is not the country I fought for." He was very suspicious, and he actually went out and bought the freaking Warren Commission report and read it. It's the most boring thing in the world and full of lies. And he read it. He said, "There's something wrong with this." And then Mark Lane comes out with Rush to Judgment, which was probably the first book that could be considered conspiracy theory. And that was when the CIA put a tag on conspiracy theory. Said, "We've got to watch out for these people. They're looking too closely into these things." And so I grew up with that healthy suspicion of, I don't know about this, you know. And it served me well because I think people get so easily duped, especially me being a child of the 60s. We believed our institutions. We trusted them. Oh my God, Richard Speck is convicted by a jury. He's guilty. And you did not look beneath the veil any further. And it was just amazing, but it was also shattered by the JFK assassination because people from that point on began to take a look. So having grown up in that era, I'm seeing so much progress with stuff, but I'm also seeing how easy it is to put out fake news. It is harder for those putting it out because you have people cropping up like us who investigate stuff like that, but it's still being cranked out. It's just becoming a little easier to spot.
I find it's interesting too, and like I think this is like maybe something that people are kind of getting hip to now. I've noticed with like especially the Idaho 4 case. Now maybe I don't think, but maybe it's possible that maybe the news will get, I guess, information that really isn't fucking given to anybody else. But like that was things that even like, you know, some true crime channels were pointing out with the Idaho 4 case. It's like, yo, the news is coming out and saying stuff that's not even in the court documents that are being dropped. So, like, where are these stories and this evidence coming from if it's not even mentioned in the court papers? And it's almost like, is the news just making this up to make it sound like glorified? Or is there evidence that they know of that we haven't been privy to yet? But it's just weird how, like, even the news sometimes doesn't really match what's even being said in court at some point.
I think there's a fine line between people discovering things and people throwing out misinformation, and that's what kind of clouds a lot of this stuff. You have to be very careful where stuff is coming from, and you have to weigh it on its own merits. Like going back to critical thinking, you don't have to be an investigator to figure certain things out. But yeah, there's definitely, I think, with Idaho, that the more this stuff is being dissected, the more it's pointing towards this massive background of characters and events that are scrambling like crazy to cover themselves right now. I think it's a huge operation going on.
Oh,
and,
yeah, that's what even, J.J. Vance, I mean, there's stuff that we
Yeah.
haven't really even covered on our show, but, like,
Mhm.
it is almost like he says it's just weird how, like, there's this really huge spider web around it when you start getting, like, connections and degrees of separation. So much, like, from that to, like, Bitcoin and money embezzlement and drugs, he says it's just wild. He's like,
Well, that's that evil matrix. They all kind of link up after a while. On that level, there's just nefarious deeds on in all kinds of ways, but they all link back because they all have to launder the money. They all have to have some basic central
yeah, money
source.
laundering was part of it too. That's what he.
Yes,
Yeah.
it all gets back to money and power and how that is appropriated. So, it wouldn't surprise me at all that Idaho was a whole different picture. Just like
that was probably like a horrible outcome from like the bottom of this barrel of shit that was going on. You know what I'm saying? Like somewhere there was a problem up here, and that all caused little things to go on here, and that didn't come out right. So this is the issue that we have now.
Yeah, and actually going back to Speck, the correlations, I think there could be more drawn, because the reason I believe the murders were committed had nothing to do with a robbery, and everything to do with once I eliminated Richard Speck, I thought, well, wait a minute, what is this about? What's the common denominator? So I thought, okay, they all worked at the same hospital. It was a training hospital in a lower income neighborhood for minority patients. They were getting their training there, and then they were going to graduate. Sadly, 3 weeks later, they didn't make it. But I went to the hospital. Something had to be going on at the hospital. Why would you murder 8 women? Granted, some of them were probably collateral, but I didn't think it was an angry boyfriend that went in there and then just killed everybody. I thought, this is a coordinated, this is an assassination, this is targeted. So I could not get much information on a hospital in 1966 that then was sold and merged into another group. You'll appreciate this, Nick. They were merged into a group called Evangelical Health Systems.
Oh, jeez.
Anyway,
Just gotta throw religion in there to church it up and make it sound nice and look.
Really? Well, there's a lot of religious stuff in the background of this too, unfortunately. But the hospital, I started to look up what I could find, which were legal documents. And I'm telling you, the number of malpractice suits filed against this hospital should have had no patience if people knew. It was hideous. 2 of the malpractice suits were of a special interest. One was filed in 1980, but it was an incident at the hospital that happened in 1967, which was almost a year to the day from the date of the murders. But the doctors responsible were in charge of the hospital during the whole time. They were there for the 60s. So they were in charge in 66 and the years before that. What happened was a young black woman in 1980 was having trouble conceiving a child, and so she went to a fertility doctor. And in 1967, she had a medical abortion because she had a health problem and she didn't want to have the baby at that time. And so she got permission, had the abortion at the hospital where the nurses trained by 2 doctors. And after the abortion, she said, well, will I be able to have kids? Because I still want to have kids at some point. And they said, oh, sure, you can have kids. And the nurse gave her birth control device and said, you can plan to have your children now and blah, blah, blah. So in 1980, she decides she wants to have the child and she can't conceive. She goes to a fertility doctor. He says, you're not going to have kids. Your tubes were tied.
Oh, my gosh.
So this was done at the nurses training hospital by a doctor whose initials work out to 1 and 8 and 7 and 13.
Oh.
The date of the killing and the 1 and 8, which we've talked about already. Anyway, that's a side note.
That's
So this was done surreptitiously without her knowledge. She was lied to. She was told, you can have a child when you plan on it. Here's the birth control device and blah, blah, blah. They sent her on her way. So she filed a malpractice suit, which got jerked around by the courts and dropped because it was outside the statute of limitations. The poor woman didn't even know what had been done to her for 13 years. But
13.
yeah, she found out in
Right.
1980. So then I found evidence of another one, a black woman again, had been unknowingly and unwillingly sterilized. They had tied her tubes. It was illegal in Illinois to do that, but it was being done at the nurses training hospital in the 60s. And when I went back, I did a research into the nurses. Some of them were very outspoken, headstrong young women. I don't think that if they knew about this, that they would have kept their mouths shut.
Right.
And I believe that might have been, I don't know for sure, but it's my theory that that was a motive in the murders, to take these women out and the rest of the women in the house. Maybe they were witnesses, maybe they had spoken of it. They were collateral damage.
You know,
And then I had to do then I did a lot of research into eugenics, which was also extremely revealing for those
Wow.
times. And so here we get back to our friends from the Third Reich and their ideology of selective breeding.
you know, see, this is really weird, and especially since you just said that now. Just like, you know, it could just be happen chance that you pulled these two cases, but just going in occult symbology, you know, you have the maiden, which is down at the seventh sphere, and she's ready to procreate, which would go down into the ninth, where you're pregnant in the moon, and then you birth out whatever Malkuth. You know, going back up, if you were to go towards sphere 3, which is kind of like diagonally across the tree from 7, and they do have a relationship in tarot, so that does make me think there is some sort of connection there. You get the old hag, who is no longer able to produce children, who is on the left pillar, which is black.
Oh, wow.
You know, and then when you start getting into Nazis, they were all big into white and blue eyes, which is the total opposite of the left at the right pillar. The white pillar and the top with blue chest.
Wow.
So it's just now I'm just like, yo, what?
Yeah,
Very weird to me.
The colors were significant too, because you had supposedly the killer Richard Speck wore black. They were all black that night. Well, bad guys wear black and burglars wear black, so that's pretty standard. But nurses wear all white. They're from their caps to their shoes, their stockings, everything's white. So you have your black and your white, and what unifies them at the murder is red blood, satanic colors.
Yeah,
Black,
Chess said,
white, and red, and
I mean,
unified
Gabor,
blood, which is
sorry.
the symbol
Mars.
of life and also from the murder.
Yeah.
So when I realized that was black, white, and red, I thought, oh, here we go with the secret society stuff, because it's just all over the place. It's the death cult, it's the numbers, it's the imagery, it's the colors, it's the ritualistic behavior.
That's the colors that are wrapped around in that big black bottle of Coke people drink.
That's true. That's so true.
Which is made originally from cocaine leaves.
Correct.
Think about that again. I think, believe it or not, cocaine, I do think goes along with Gabor, which is Mars on the Tree of Life. I think when it comes down to
wow.
drugs and minerals, I'm almost positive cocaine might go with that.
Right.
Yeah, and 777 at least. You know, Crowley identified trade through drugs in there. So.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something.
insane.
It's just really weird.
Crazy. And I think there was a drug connection also, guys, because getting back to the two women who had been sterilized, back in the 60s, you didn't go to fertility doctors.
I was surprised when you said that. I was like, oh, wow.
Yes, I was surprised that she did. I'm glad she did, because that was a big clue. I'm not glad it happened to her. It was a big clue. But for women did not see fertility doctors in the 60s. They didn't have fertility treatments the way they do today. You just assumed that you couldn't conceive or your husband was sterile. You just didn't take it any further. The fact that they did was exceptional. And also, sociological research has shown that women of color are much less likely to seek fertility treatments than white women. They don't have the resources, they don't have the hospital coverage or the medical coverage. They just tend not to, even in today, because that was a recent article that I looked up by a sociologist. So the fact that the odds of two women from the same hospital having the same issue at the same time of the murders was like, oh, wow. I think that this is just the tip of an iceberg. How many women had their tubes tied and they never knew it? They never found out about it.
Yeah.
So that was what I tried to avoid speculation when I was analyzing the first part of the book, but in the second part of the book, the Deconstructing a Mass Murder book, I went into, speculating, drawing inferences from these malpractice suits that had been filed. And another idea I had was they worked at a hospital. What's going on? They have access to drugs. And was there drug smuggling going on, being close to the lake in Chicago where there was a lot of shipping going on? Was there smuggling going on? And another part that I uncovered was that the Filipino nurses came to this country because President Johnson had signed into law this act. We had a severe shortage of nurses, and the Philippines are very dedicated to nursing and healthcare. It's one of their traditions. So we opened borders to them to come here and work in our hospitals. And by the mid-'60s, there were thousands of nurses. This started in '64. So nurses were coming into this country from the Philippines to address the shortage. There were several hundred of them in Chicago alone. What also happened in '64 was the Philippines entered into an alliance with the U.S. in the Vietnam War. They opened borders to the west between the Philippines and Vietnam to give what they called humanitarian aid. They didn't send, they supposedly weren't sending soldiers, they were sending workers among them. And in Wikipedia, people engaged in, quote, psychological operations, unquote. So in my mind, I'm like, okay, you open borders from Vietnam to Philippines to the west, and you open borders from Philippines to the U.S. to the east.
I could be wrong, but I think at one point when me and my boy Thrash cover MK Ultra, I could be wrong, but I think like there was either might have been something prior to MK Ultra, maybe been like Bluebird or one of the other Artichoke, one of those.
Right.
I'm almost positive they go over to the Philippines and tinker around with it first before they start doing it in the United States.
Yeah, I think that's where they started Phoenix as actually.
Or maybe it was maybe
Phoenix.
one of the it was pre MK Ultra. I'm almost positive.
Right.
Stuff.
They were doing what they called Psy Wars. They were doing that from the Philippines to Vietnam. So in my view, just the on a very basic level, you're opening borders. That's allowing for trafficking. You could have drugs going through because they were looking for rat lines for heroin from Europe. It was getting increasingly difficult to smuggle from Europe into the States after World War II. So they're looking for rat lines. I'm not wanting to besmirch any of the Filipino nurses who came here, but there was a golden opportunity for somebody to be smuggling because they were coming here en masse. And so I thought, well, it could have been about drugs, and one of the nurses found out and didn't keep her mouth shut. Or I think there was something besides sterilizations. There was something going on at the hospital, so basically.
I mean, that's how you would even think, again, to just go back to Idaho 4. Sometimes I think there might have been something going on, either somehow with the owners or the people in the house, and that may have been like a cleanup crew move.
Yes. Yeah, I got the feeling right away it was drug related, and anything drug related is going to go very high up because it's ingrained into certain levels of law enforcement and mostly politicians. It's such a big money maker. It people can't help but be doing that if they're going to engage in illegal activity. So I think drugs in my case was very viable. And the drug, in fact, when Richard Speck was drugged the night of the murders and lost his memory, everybody said, it's in the literature, it was heroin, he took a shot of heroin, blah, blah, blah. He said it was a blue bottle. The heroin doesn't come in a blue bottle, but pharmaceuticals do. And drugs that you can obtain from a hospital come in blue bottles. So I don't know if they knocked him out on purpose, and then later on it was banged into his head that he did it because all he saw when he was in jail pre-trial, all he saw were psychiatrists. He saw psychiatrists more often than he saw his own defense lawyers. And they had an effect on him. He looked up to men of authority, remember? So he was like impressed by them. And he said, if they say I did it, then I did it. I probably did it because they're telling me I did it. Everybody's saying I did it. He was not the sharpest pencil in the box. And with the weight of all these powerful people leaning on him, he even, I believe, at one point was given sodium pentothal, and he still didn't give up the murders because he just didn't remember. And that he was given that. I believe his psychiatrist thought he was given that because he said, "Oh, these guys in white coats took me into a room and they shot me up with a drug, and as I was nodding out, they started asking me a bunch of questions." And the psychiatrist that tended to him had done that in another case. Here we go back to another case in Chicago, the lipstick killer, which they pinned on this 17-year-old kid, William Hirons, which I also believe was a scapegoat situation. But anyway, Speck was subjected to a lot of pressure. I don't know if he was hypnotized. I wouldn't rule out that he was, because these were neurologists and psychiatrists rather, that were evaluating him and spending time with him. And so I can't rule out MK Ultra, and I can't rule it out for Corazon either, because she barely had a grasp of the English language when she got to this country. By the time the trial rolls around 10 months later, she's testifying without an interpreter.
That's weird.
A very complex manuscript of events. I think she was at least heavily coached. I mean, if not hypnotized, I don't know. This is where I get totally into speculation, so I don't like to dwell on it.
I know what you're saying. Yeah.
But it's something that you can't rule it out either.
But wasn't there a bit of theatrics at the trial where she gets out of the witness box and then walks over and points at him, and so and then the jury immediately convicts him or something to that effect? I remember listening to something about that.
Yes, the prosecutor told her to make a flourish when she identified Richard Speck, and she came through like an Oscar-winning actress. She got off the witness stand, walked across the courtroom, pointed right in his face, and said, "This is the man." And the judge had to hit his gavel because everybody started running out of the courtroom to the payphones, because it was such a big moment, There was a lot of high drama in this case. I mean, she jumped out a window onto a ledge and screamed, "All my friends are dead, all my friends are dead."
I didn't know about that. Wow.
Yeah, when the coroner came out of the crime scene, there was already reporters and photographers all messing up the crime scene from the get-go. He said, "This is the crime of the century." And the high drama was just crazy. And that's a part of these crimes of the century that I looked into. There's an aspect of high drama. There's an aspect of right-wing activity. It's crazy. It was just everything I looked into. If I didn't pull myself out of the rabbit holes, I think I would have gone straight through to China. I just kept going into rabbit holes. And I had to, not physically, but mentally, I had to, listen, I have to stop. I'm getting away from the crime here. I'm just deconstructing a crime. But that's why I had to write the second book, just solely on the occult symbols. And based on your knowledge, Nick and Lisa, there's obviously stuff that I still don't know about that does suit this. And I'm sure there's even more, because I don't consider myself an occult expert at all. I read a lot, and when I'm interested in something, I study it and take it from there. Same. But there's so many levels to this, and sociological messages that were delivered from it. Like, nurses were scared after this. They were really scared. They were scared to go out at night. They were scared to turn the light off when they went to bed. It really, really messed up people. As a young girl, it messed me up. I was so upset over it. But it also propelled me into the direction of wanting to understand things like this more. And it also shook up the nursing profession, which happened to have a serious shortage. So to murder 8 nurses was really wretched. It was a horrendous thing to do. They didn't have enough nurses. These 8 women could have helped thousands and thousands of people in their lifetime. And the nursing shortage was because of the mistreatment of nurses across the nation And during the week of the murders, bingo, there's nursing strikes all over the country. What a great week to murder a bunch of nurses who were stepping out of, because other nurses were stepping out of line and they were resisting authority and they were walking off their jobs. Boom. 8 nurses get murdered and now the nurses are scared. I mean, it's a sociological impact that you can't ignore from this. And so, because I looked at everything about the times, having grown up then, I remember it so well. You had Vietnam people were already in a state of shell shock, or should I say PTSD from Vietnam. And so many of boys I went to high school with were going over there and getting killed. And we were afraid of communism. We were afraid of the atom bomb. My father was going to build a bomb shelter in our basement. And it was just a very stressful time on the American psyche. So they just kept hitting us with one thing after the next. There was the murder of the nurses on August 1st. A few weeks later, there was the University of Texas Tower shooting by Charles Whitman.
Right.
They started to unleash this, this mayhem across the country, and people were just, I actually enjoyed the 60s. It was a great time to be alive. I was very happy that I was alive. There was many wonderful things happening in our culture, like music and movies, and just a brilliant time to be alive. But it was so besmirched by like the Manson stuff, the Manson narrative, and the destruction of the anti-war pacifist movement, which was all calculated. And it was carried out through the murders because of their sociological impact on people's minds. And that was another crime of the century. The Sharon Tate murders was just a few years later. You had Kennedy in 63, Speck in 66, and you had Manson in 69. And they all link in strange ways through the names that we were talking about
369 too.
Yeah, the names of the people. It's not only to silence people for whatever reason, but to send this shockwave of psychic horror. The image of the nurses one by one led out of the room to this ritual death. Horrific, but it achieved its purpose. And then you have to look at the hidden hand that is pulling these strings and understand what's really going on. And I think that's when it left such an imprint on me that when I was going to do the crime chart back in, I guess, February of 2020, and I started to realize this whole thing is a crock of shit. And it just started this whole impetus to what I'm on now. And finally, I did go back and look at the crime chart. And the crime chart supports everything I said in the first book. So there are ways to learn from this and spot it and see it so that you hear something now and then say, oh, that's a bunch of bullshit. You have to train yourself a certain way to hear things and make some use of it. It has to, something ultimately good has to come from this crap that they've thrown at us for so many years culturally. And it's the gift of insight and understanding, and to realize that we are so much more than that as people. And so that's kind of my journey. It's been a crazy one. I'm enjoying every minute of it because it's fascinating on one hand. On the other hand, it's just disgraceful.
Yeah, or even sometimes
you learn is disgraceful. But like I said, what I do with it is let people know. If I can expose something, I like to share it.
Do you ever find it to be like almost creepy sometimes? Because you're like, yo, how does this keep on happening and coming up? It's almost like you're looking at something that's like giving. It's almost like evidence to, what I'm saying? Like,
well, it's like reruns of evil movies, It's always a movie. It's a freaking movie.
And I want to ask, maybe, like, I think you might have kind of answered this in some ways already. And after this, maybe we'll wrap it up. Not to like put you on the spot, but I guess like what is your thought on like the point of this case to begin with? Or the reason, like what was like the actual reason? Like, do you think it was purely like ritualistic, or like what do you think? Like, if you're not, I'm not buying this, the alleged story. What do you think was really behind it then?
I suspect it was stuff going on at the hospital.
Like like you were saying before, like
I do believe it was that, and that these nurses were really cool people. They didn't put up with crap. They were very outspoken. They were leaders, and for one example, one of the nurses that had a lot of weirdness around her particular death, Gloria Davy, whose father was a member of the Odd Fellows, by the way. She was a leader and very outspoken, and she had wanted to join the Peace Corps. Back in those days, if you joined the Peace Corps, chances are you'd go to Africa. That was where all the third world countries were that the Peace Corps was working in. Right. And why would she want to go help poor Black people in Africa while her hospital is sterilizing them in Chicago? It just didn't fit the profile of Gloria that I could see. And Gloria was known for having a sassy mouth and not putting up with crap from people. Right. And I think she saw something at the hospital. She found out what was going on, and she was like, no way, I'm not doing this. The hospital also had a lot of money invested in it from this Nurse Training Act that LBJ had signed into effect. The hospital was receiving grants to keep operating under the Nurse Training Act. I guess they got a couple $1 million, I don't know, which is a lot of money back in the 60s, right. A couple $1 million. So I believe they were really scared because eugenics was not legal in Illinois. They tried to get it legal, but it was not. It, however, was legal in 33 states of the United States.
Oh, come on.
In the 1920s and 1930s, and I went into that at great length in my first book because that was a whole other,
Did you ever come across the Kellogg's in eugenics?
No, I haven't.
Look into that, yeah. Which is really weird because like their niece is like associated with the Arantia book, which is like has a cult upon itself.
Well, this doctor who was doing this was head of Planned Parenthood in Chicago.
I think there is a Nazi connection with Chicago, and I believe it was the Kellogg guy that helped first fund the Cold Springs Harbor Laboratory in Long Island, which is where eugenics started. I believe. I mean, you have to double check me on it, but I'm more than certain there was a connection there.
I'm pretty sure of it because Chicago is like a hotbed for eugenics people. The University of Chicago, who's probably published more about eugenics than any other press, was founded by Rockefeller.
That's true.
And they had satellite hospitals that were conducting experiments on people. They were giving people a glass of plutonium. What was it? Plutonium 19? I forgot. 19. There you go. They were giving people plutonium to see what the effects would be. They had experimented on people, giving them malaria in the 1940s. There's a lot of ugliness behind that. And the University of Chicago, like I said, had all these satellite clinics and hospitals at their disposal. And they were practicing on people without their knowledge. So this sterilization should not come as such a big shock because they were doing a lot of crazy stuff to people. In fact, one of Speck's psychiatrists, not the guy that wrote the book, but somebody else on his panel, ran a residential home for disadvantaged and disabled young children. And when I read that, I got chills up my spine. I thought, what the hell was he really doing? Yeah. And this is back then. This is somebody connected to the Speck case. They might have been doing all manner of experiments. I also came across a document, Nick, I thought of sending it to you. You may have seen it already. But do you remember when Bill Clinton issued that apology back in, I think, 94? The U.S. Government Accounting Office issued this report. It will curl your hair to read it about the experiments and the nature of experiments conducted on unwilling veterans, children, and sick people over the course of years, to which the CIA disavowed any knowledge, just like in Mission Impossible, they disavowed any knowledge. And I don't know if you've seen that. I'd be happy to send it to you guys because I was like, oh, here we go again with experiments, human experimentation taking place in Chicago and hospitals. And God knows, maybe that was going on at the training hospital as well. For all we know, all bets are off where that hospital is concerned. So that is what I think, though. It was definitely the hospital, and the fact that I discovered the eugenics stuff and then I researched that, it was fairly common in the 1920s and 30s. It was fairly popular among certain politicians and legislators because they could just take people. They considered it to be for the feeble-minded, but how many people will you end up throwing into that category?
Yeah.
So it was very sobering research that I did in the course of working on this book. And I probably could have even gone further, but I thought the book's got to have an ending sometime.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And then I just went into the second book right away to just wrap up the occult stuff that I saw. But there's definitely occult involvement. There's a dark cult. I don't know who you want to call them. They all kind of play in the same sandbox, I think, as far as certain things are concerned about humanity and the lack of value of human life. So that's pretty much where it's at, where it's come to right now.
It's weird. And it was just like a thing that popped in my head from, again, with Gilgo. And it's just funny how, like, you get some crossover weird things. When we were covering Gilgo and running Gematria, I think there might have been something behind it. At first, we kind of thought it was funny, but there was a lot of Back to the Future references. And plutonium. And the Back to the Future car ran on plutonium.
Wow, that's right.
It's like, what the fuck? How does these weird things come up? It's just so weird.
They sort of reverse engineer time in a way. I mean, there was a reference I made in my book. I don't know if you saw the part of the book where I had the Life magazine cover. There was the cover of Life magazine that was July 29th, 66. It was about the nurses' murders. On the front is I'll just make this real short.
Mm-hmm.
Richard Speck had 3 fingerprints. I don't even want to go into how they got those, but they were found on a door to one of the bedrooms. And so they isolated the prints by putting strips of white tape alongside the prints.
Yeah, I see it now.
Perpendicular to the door. And when I saw the magazine cover, I was like, what am I looking at? I didn't know what I was looking at. And I realized this is the door turned sideways with 2 strips of white tape parallel to each other. And I'm looking at it, oh my God, it's an 11.
Oh,
it's an 11. Because the door was turned sideways. They didn't have to turn it sideways except to show that it was an 11. And what's at the top of the title of the magazine, Life? The 9 nurses.
Oh, 9/11.
9/11.
Oh.
Right on freaking Life magazine in July 1966. When I saw, I was like, oh boy. I mean, it just kept, it just kept happening. It just kept coming up. Different things kept cropping up like
That's
whack-a-moles.
wild. Like what?
So there's 9/11 on there, and I was just, now what? But it kind of fit into everything else I was finding out. All the woo-woo stuff that was going on was real.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just going to throw this up on the screen real quick for people to see. I do think that's kind of interesting.
Yep.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you see the 11, and the man's fingers pointing. I didn't know what the hand was doing there, but the hand, the thumb, and the index finger are bracketing the 2 strips of white tape.
Get the 9 nurses, the 11. So
and that was so deliberate because like I said, the door's on its side. What do you have to turn a door on its side for? They could have shown it going, horizontal.
Or like the 2 pillars for the Masonic temple.
Yes.
Yeah.
The Masonic, and then the square that's a piece of post-it note in the middle, looking like the temple in the middle, Temple of Solomon, whatever temple they want to refer to. So, and then the 2 fingers, like, here, look, this is another breadcrumb. So it's just, and I didn't see 9/11 right away either, because there's so much to absorb when you're doing this kind of research. But there it was in plain sight, as they say.
Yeah, which is weird too. I mean, just a couple of them, like, not that I want to get into it, but if I start looking at the gematria, even for the phrase 9 nurses, you start seeing some weird stuff.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So very weird, very interesting. Thank you so much for coming on. That was a great chat. I really, really thoroughly enjoyed that. I really had a great time having you on, and I would definitely have to get you on for more stuff. Like I was saying prior, there's already a couple of ideas that I'd like to have you back on for. So,
that would be great.
Yeah. This is really interesting, and like I said, like you even do it in ways that I didn't look at it, like you pulling up birth charts and stuff, like taking dates. I never would have thought that. So it's cool for me to see it done from a different angle as well. You know, it makes me think I'm not so crazy.
Right.
I'm like, all right, we both got to the same like points, but different ways. That's cool.
Yeah.
Let everybody know about your book and your stuff again, real quick, before we.
Okay, the first book is Richard Speck and the 8 Nurses: Deconstructing a Mass Murder, and it's on Amazon and all your printing outlets, Barnes and Noble, places like that. It's in print and ebook. The second book is Desperate Rites: Astrology and the Occult in the Richard Speck Murders, and that's all also in Amazon and all the other places I just mentioned. And I can be reached on Twitter or X at my handle is Star Sleuth, but you can also find me as BD Salerno. I'm working on a website right now, but it's not quite ready. Hopefully it'll be up maybe next week.
Oh, all right. So you know what? Make sure you give me the. Well, do you know the link for it yet already? Because by the time this goes out, it'll be up. So that's perfect.
Okay, great. So thank you so much, Nick. I mean, you guys are my heroes. I've been following you since before you were thrown off of YouTube the first time.
Oh God! Oh man! Oh, so you've been around since the beginning. That is great.
I've been.
I'm on the 4th one now. Knock on wood, I'm doing all right.
Bitter beginning and enjoying your shows and your output, and I was just delighted when you approached me, because I was going to come to you and tell you about my book, and you approached me first, and I was like, oh, wow, this is incredible.
I was like, it's someone into occult true crime, and they like write.
Yeah,
I'm like, if they can write a book, odds are. I mean, not everybody, but if you can write a book, I would assume you can also go on a podcast and talk.
Oh yeah, I've done a fair amount of them, but I have some other books that I wrote about forensic astrology that I've talked about. Those were a few years ago, but these are the latest, and from now on, I think it's going to be true crime and occult stuff all the way, because it's just a never-ending investigation. So thank you so much for having me, and thank you, Lisa, for being here. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa, for joining us.
Very, very informative.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, and so all your notes, not all your notes, all of your links I'll leave in the show notes in the bottom. I'll get those from you after the show if you don't mind. Just send me everything you'd like me to share, and I'll throw it in the show notes. And the links in there for all my other stuff, and for the Clown World Weekly with Spiritual Gangsters is in the bottom. Check that out if you haven't yet. It's a new live show every 10:30 a.m. on Tuesdays. Again, thank you both. Thank you, BD, for coming on. I really had an amazing talk, and we're definitely going to get you on again in the future. And that's the end of another Occult Rejects. And until the next one.